we now bring you the second part of our conversation with Jacob Woocher on LA's war on public housing.
Well, we have part 6, the sacking of Dana Strand, where you detail the Hahn family. Folks are most familiar with Janice. And you actually talk about how, I guess, can you just give us a little bit of background into that family, how, quote unquote, important they've been in LA's history, or recent history, should I say?
Yeah, so Kenneth Hahn was like this really big shot county supervisor for like 50 years or something like that. He represented the southern portion of the county, and I don't totally understand this, but somehow has built like a lot of goodwill and loyalty with a lot of the black community in LA, which like,
well, Kenneth Hahn Park is near like kind of that Inglewood,
sure.
like that area. So I mean,
it's a great park.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I was going to say art and artists and all that. Bad dude, but I love that fucking park, man.
There's a bridge from Culver City that goes into Kenneth Hahn, and it's actually the Mark Ridley Thomas Bridge. Oh my god, we got to rename all this shit.
Yeah, no, but that is a great park. I've been there many times. I love it.
Nice hikes. Yeah. So he's like a liberal. He's like a Cold War liberal. I don't know. You know, something I thought was revealing is like, okay, when Martin Luther King comes to town, he's there. He's like greeting. So to his credit, okay, he's not like an outright segregationist, right? But then later in the 60s, I think it's Stokely Carmichael comes to town, and he's like, get this guy out of here. Like, he has no business fomenting hate. So he's like not down with black power, right? He's not down with like the later 60s, like much more radical ideology. So that's sort of where his politics are. His children have had a huge impact on the city. James Hahn is his son. He was mayor from 2001 to 2005, but most importantly, he was a city attorney from, I think, like 1985 to 1990 something, maybe all the way through 2001. And he really pioneered the gang injunction and this like really harsh war on gangs, like this kind of no holds barred, like just absolute repression, surveillance, criminalization campaign. He was huge in doing that. I had the weirdest experience where he was the judge in the Santa Monica court that I do my eviction defense in, and for like a couple months. So I had a lot of interactions with him.
Wow,
he's an odd guy. Anyways, it was weird. He would let me yell at him though, which I appreciated.
Nice. Okay.
And then there's Janice Hahn, who's his younger sister, who was city council member of Council District 15, which has a lot of the public housing for a number of years, and is now on the County Board of Supervisors. And you know, they all sort of have the same like liberal politics, and they get this reputation for being like even progressive at times, but they've all been on the same page when it comes to like policing, when it comes to gang injunctions. You know, Janice Hahn is like celebrating the gang injunction for Wilmington, which is where the Dana Strand complex is. That happens in like 2004, I think. She's like, thank God this gang injunction came in. You know, she's like literally celebrating it. And they're all, or at least James and Janice, they're on the same page about public housing as well. So Janice Hahn is really crucial in pushing forward the privatization and redevelopment of Dana Strand, and then also of Jordan Downs as well. Yeah.
There's this astonishing number that you wrote about, that you said not until 14 years later would the number of new units, talking about the privatization, 512 in total, built and managed by nonprofits, Mercy Housing, and Abode Communities, match or exceed the original 384 demolished. How are they able to work around this like astonishing number? And then like this fact that 14 years, it took 14 years for them to match or exceed that the number that they demolished.
Yeah, so Dana Strand was probably the hardest development to get information on. There's just like not that much written on it, and there's not many. There's some public records that are helpful. So it's 384 units to begin with. I get the sense, and it's hard to know for sure, I get the sense that like basically every single tenant was displaced and didn't ever get the chance to return, based on how the media characterizes it, based on like the relocation plan that they provide in some of these documents. So yeah, and they do these like very slow rebuilding where it's like in 4 separate phases, and it takes them like several years just to build back the first like 100-something units. And then it's not until, how many years later did you say?
14 years.
14 years later,
Wow.
do they even have enough units to, like, if they wanted to rehouse everyone, they could, So I don't think people are waiting around for 10 years and then getting a call from the housing authority being like, hey, we got a space for you. Like, that's not happening, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask, is that a tactic to kind of wait people out, you think? Or
For sure,
yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why it took so long. I think that's another part of the issue with affordable housing is like, you just have these super complex financing schemes. You have to get all these different players together, and you have to get this bank and this investor and this tax credit firm, and like it takes time and it takes a lot of energy. It's just so dumb. It's like the way this country does things in like the dumbest fucking way, like health insurance. It's like the same thing, right? Like you have to get all these different people together with the right amount of money, with the right amount, and it takes forever. So that's, I think, part of the problem with affordable housing too. So I think that might be some of the reason why there's a delay. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing too. It's like they're not even building back more. I mean, they did build back more units, but it took them like 14 years for a net gain of 100-something units. It's pathetic. It's like not a serious model for solving the housing crisis in any way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're getting, I mean, how much money was poured into that project?
So much money. I mean,
Yeah.
Private and public.
Yeah. And the last part I wanted to touch on was you wrote beyond a 2003 article written by Williams. I'm forgetting her first name. Sabrina Williams. Yes. Essentially, no publicly available evidence remains of these years of resistance by the Dana Strand's tenants. We saw not only an erasure of those people living there, but also an erasure of their resistance. Why is it important to document not only that resistance, not only for people today, but for the future?
Yeah, I think it's super important for people to know that you can, and people did fight against the housing authority and this stuff. Yeah, it's too bad. I really had trouble finding anything on the Dana Strand tenants other than this one article. And then I was able to talk to her on the phone, the author of this article. It sounds like the tenants fought for a couple years, like pretty hard, against the housing authority, and they got maybe some help from like legal aid lawyers or something like that. But unfortunately, I really couldn't find anything. Like, it certainly wasn't written about in the media. Miss Williams told me that there was some sort of like legal, I don't know if it was like a lawsuit that was actually filed or threatened or correspondence. And I asked the housing authority if they had any documents on that, and they didn't. So yeah, that whole history's just been erased.
So yeah, then we return to Jordan Downs and Villaraigosa, who, I mean, he's one of the mayors that I remember the most. I was a teenager when he was doing his thing. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I found out he increased LAPD to over 10,000 officers. Like, he's a real piece of shit. But he comes for Jordan Downs, and he calls it one of the most vied for plots of land in all of LA. So let's talk about it. Why is this plot of land so sought after? And, the fact that, like, Villaraigosa went and made this a priority.
Totally. Yeah. I've been trying to figure that out, too. Like, why did they keep targeting Jordan Downs as opposed to the other 3 projects in Watts? I don't have like a super good answer, but the fact is that they did, right? Villaraigosa is such a scummy slime ball. Yeah. I remember he came to my high school at one point and like gave a speech, and I was like, oh, this guy's cool. Like, he's young, sure, yeah. He's like energetic. And then just doing the research on him, like almost everything that pops up is like, oh, this guy sucks. Like you said, like he's a huge part of his whole thing was like increasing LAPD. Yeah. Giving a ton of money to developers in downtown. I mean, again, it's reductive to say these people are all the same, but they're sort of all the same. Like Democrat, Republican, they're sort of all the same. So yeah, fuck Villaraigosa. And then the last thing he's been doing is like campaigning against rent control on the statewide level. He's a bad person.
When he helped kill, was it Prop 10, right?
Totally. Yeah. He was doing like these Spanish language advertisements. Like, anyways, Jordan Downs. Yeah. So they're coming back for Jordan Downs, and Villaraigosa makes it a core part of his housing that works plan. I mean, that's another, like, a whole aspect of this is sort of the housing crisis in general. And it seems like each politician, they sort of don't want to take it on, because then you have to admit that you failed when homelessness just keeps going up, right? But he sort of tries to take on housing with this like BS housing that works plan in 2008. It's not worth really getting into. It's a lot of nonsense. But a part of that housing as works plan is like, we're going to redevelop Jordan Downs. And that comes after these this like corporate dominated body called the Los Angeles Economy and Jobs Committee. It is, I believe.
God,
that's
these
what it's
things have the
called.
dumbest names.
Yeah,
Go on.
names. They released a whole report with like their priorities for LA, and their main priority for South LA is the privatization of public housing. They want all public housing to be redeveloped. So it's like, the CEOs of all these banks and these big real estate firms, like they put a target on public housing, and Villaraigosa responds, right? So he gets the privatization of Jordan Downs rolling, basically. Like after the 1989 defeat, about 20 years later, the city's just back at it. And then I'm sort of going to go beyond your question, because it's like this one part that I really loved. I mean, it's kind of horrifying, but like Maxine Waters, who I don't know, is mostly fine. I'm not trying to like come for Maxine Waters or whatever.
No, dude, get her ass.
She holds this hearing in, I think it's March of 2008. So it's a couple months before Villaraigosa announces this officially. And she's like, I'm holding this official like congressional hearing to clear up any rumors that are going on about Jordan Downs. So like, we need to be super clear. And she like has the head of the housing authority at the time there. And she's like, do you have a plan for Jordan Downs? He's like, no, like we do not have a plan. Like we have a vision. And it's like, oh shit. It's like, and that vision includes like privatization. That vision includes like doubling the units. That vision includes, so they list off like all of these specific features that do end up becoming part of the plan, while at the same time, like lying to people's faces, being like, no, we don't have a plan. Like we're just thinking about things. Like we're just kicking ideas around, and don't worry about anything. There's just rumors at this point. And meanwhile, the city's also buying a big plot of land that's in the middle of Jordan Downs that becomes this like infamous whole thing because there's a lot of toxic waste there that was poisoning people.
Jesus.
So it's just like this completely backdoor scumminess of telling people we're here to address the rumors that like you all are talking about, like you all are pushing these rumors around, and then just like completely deceiving people. Yeah. It's really it's honestly shocking and there's a whole transcript of it because it's like a congressional hearing, which is kind of cool that there's a transcript. So it's kind of wild to read. Yeah.
You talk about I think it's in part 9 of the series. Can you speak a little bit more about this project that was bought by?
Yeah, so there's this plot of land that's like right in the middle of Jordan Downs that the housing authority purchases because they know they want to use it as part of this big redevelopment scheme. And the way they talk about it is like they're going to revitalize Watts again. They're singing the same tune. It's called the factory. I mean, that's what people call it. It was used for various industrial uses, basically, over the course of the last like 50 or so years. And because of that, there's a lot of toxic chemicals like on that land that like seep into the groundwater and that like get into the soil. And basically the housing authority does the bare minimum to deal with that. So it's discovered at some point that like, oh shit, the toxic waste essentially of this particular plot of land may have spread to Jordan Downs where people are living. And organizers with the LA Human Right to Housing Collective, which is made up of like LA Can, Unión de Vecinos, these great orgs.
Okay, that name is good. I'll let it slide.
Okay.
No, I was saying all these things have bad names. I'm like, that's a good name.
That's a good name. Yeah. They got these like emails with housing authority executives being like, it's going to cost us only $10,000 to do tests to see if it has spread beyond the boundaries of this land into the homes, basically. And they don't do it. They choose not to spend that money. So it's just from the very beginning, there is this tendency to downplay it, to ignore it, to try to do the absolute bare minimum. There's a whole back and forth. Like the state gets involved. The state orders them to completely remove the soil from the factory and replace the soil. So they do this like big remediation process. But then the residents are all still concerned because it's spread beyond that land. And there are these tests that the residents themselves do that show that it's spread beyond that land. And the housing authority basically ignores them. And it's just a whole saga of over and over again, the housing authority choosing to essentially risk the lives of the tenants because they want to push ahead with the redevelopment. One of the biggest bombshells here is that LAUSD which operates Jordan High School right next to this whole thing, sued the housing authority because they're saying the housing authority, I mean, I don't remember exactly the legal argument, like saying they were something about they were negligent in not cleaning up, or they wanted to be reimbursed for their own cleanup costs. And in the lawsuit, they explicitly say that they were told by the housing authority that the housing authority didn't want to do more testing and more cleaning up because they were pursuing the redevelopment of the complex. And at various points that the residents were calling for the redevelopment to stop, and it's a whole thing. And then, I think even today there continue to be concerns about poisoning of people nearby, and the housing authority really just doing the bare minimum.
And they had their own independent study done of the soil, right? The residents had banded together and
yeah, they did their own tests. I think that was in 2016. Again, the housing authority just ignores it because at that point, by 2016, the state had cleared it, and the city certainly wasn't doing anything. So there was not really any official body to force the housing authority to do it. So the residents are trying to organize and trying to say, look, this needs to be fixed too. You need to do more, and they just get ignored. Basically.
You think they purposely bought that land, knowing that it was like the epicenter of this poisoning, or not poisoning, but
I think they didn't realize how much of a pain in the ass it was going to be, because they had to spend several years literally replacing every single pound of soil that was in that land.
Wow.
So then once they did realize that, they were trying to keep it as under the rug as possible. Yeah.
Going back to the part 7, how did Villaraigosa, how was he able to do what others in the past, like Tom Bradley, couldn't? What made him kind of break through?
That's a good question. I guess there must have been stuff going on behind the scenes of him and the housing authority being like, this is a priority. I think for him it was, I'm the big mayor now. This is a big issue for our city. We need to, quote unquote, again, revitalize, gentrify Watts. I don't know. You get the sense that James Hahn wasn't as ambitious, I guess. Okay. Villaraigosa much more so. And then, yeah, he gets the ball rolling, but things don't actually really start moving forward until around 2012 when Doug Guthrie comes in, and that's when they choose the developers. But yeah, no, certainly under Villaraigosa at the beginning, things are happening. Immediately you start hearing stories in the LA Times about people being evicted more, and the housing authority explicitly says, one of their guys explicitly says, we are enforcing lease rules more than we have before. It's really clear. It's they're trying to get people out, And
it was something for somebody had missed out on 34 cents off their rent.
Yeah, tiny little things like that. Tiny little things like people being a little bit behind on their rent, or, these public housing leases are really intense. They have all sorts of obligations that people can be evicted for. And at various points in the Jordan Down process, starting in, I would say, early 2009 and through the 2010s, you have various people who, it's not just activists saying this, it's the housing authority guy, right? Or one of the nonprofits that's involved in the redevelopment being yeah, we are cracking down. That's exactly what we're doing.
Could you give a few examples of what those could be, what those violations could be?
Yeah, for example, in some of the stories, a family was evicted for not keeping their unit clean enough.
Interesting.
Stuff like that.
What does that even mean?
So does someone come in and check or something, or what? Yeah. Interesting.
I don't know. And then the other thing that comes through in the reporting is people were convinced to take voluntary, so under the threat of eviction, they're convinced to leave. So that might not show up in the numbers of oh yeah, we evicted this many, because the organizers were on top of this. So the organizers in the Human Right to Housing Collective were tracking evictions and writing articles about how, look, they're evicting more people from Jordan Downs. So some of these evictions weren't even showing up in the numbers because they're convincing people to leave under the threat of eviction.
And you were talking about that evictions were on the rise.
Totally, yeah. So in 2012, that's when that really starts. Hackla brings in a bunch of services, and I talked to this person, Becky Dennison, who was with LA Can at the time, and she's like, people liked the services, right? These were things that people wanted, like education classes or different classes for mothers, or for, all these different nonprofits that come in and just do these things that are genuinely helpful to people. And then that's exactly at the same time that they're increasing evictions. And it's interesting. You have these, even some of the mainstream press, the way they describe these services is there's a dual motive there, right? It's not just to help people. The way they talk about it is it's also to, something about preparing the residents for wealthier people to move in. So it's like they're trying to both weed out the like quote unquote problem people and provide certain resources so that the people who stay in whatever way are more acceptable to like a wider, wealthier base of people who they want to move in. It's really insidious stuff. But yeah, it's also very sophisticated because it makes it harder to be like these evil housing authority. They don't want anything good for you when people are saying, well, hey, they're putting my kid through this education program, And this is exactly the same time as well that you see the community safety partnership come in. And that shit is like, that stuff is insidious. I mean, that's an LAPD program. That's like the counterinsurgency, quote unquote, community policing. There's a quote from I think it's from, I forget if it's Michael Moore or Charlie Beck, but they are saying explicitly, like, under this community safety partnership, we are able to be involved in the community like we never have before. Mm-hmm. So they have their eyes and ears everywhere. Like, they have real relationships with some people, and they know everything about people. There's more surveillance. There's more interactions. This is just an excuse for the state to deepen, their involvement in these people's lives.
I've seen it described as becoming like part of the fabric of that community, and the way they sell it to the public is, hey, we go into these communities and crime goes down. But in reality, these cops are coming into these communities and they're told, hey, don't do your traditional type of quote unquote policing, right? Don't come into these spaces and arrest people. Instead, give them a warning. And so you see this kind of declining in this crime, and we know that LAPD for decades has been altering crime numbers and putting them out to help their propaganda. And they also couple it with, probably inspired by HACLA, they bring in these different programs, after school programs. Hey, we're going to take your kids over. The Watts Rams, I know, is one of the programs that they have. And so they do the same type of thing where they bring in the services that residents in those communities have long advocated for, have wanted, come, with a cop with a gun. It'll only come in this way. It can only come with this infiltration into your community. Again, they've gotten a lot smarter in how to market these programs.
Sophisticated stuff. Yeah, Ruth Wilson Gilmore talks about this program where they came and they like gave all the grandmas computers, right? So they're getting things that they need, but it's at the expense of the police being ever more involved in their lives, right? And I think, like you said, it's counterinsurgency. I think it has to be seen as trying to nip any anti-police organizing in the bud. Yeah. Like, they really want people to see the police as part of their community. They're not the enemy, and that's the whole point, increasing the legitimacy of the police. I think it has to be seen also in the context of the specific history of Watts as a home to like very radical organizing. Yeah. Maybe even revolutionary organizing, right? Jordan Downs was a center of the Watts uprising in 1965. Like, a very core part of that rebellion was people meeting up at Jordan Downs and thinking how they're going to fight back, because you've got a concentration of 700 of the poorest, mostly black family. I mean, at that time, mostly black families. In 1992, there was very radical organizing around and before the uprising in 92 by the gangs, by a peace movement that developed among the gangs of the different public housing projects in Watts. This history to me is like completely fascinating and gets really ignored, I think, in the way that people talk about LA progressive history. People just fucking ignore this amazing organizing by the gangs of mostly of Jordan Downs and Imperial Courts and Nickerson Gardens. And then right before the uprising in April 26th of 1992, right before that, they formalized this peace, this gang truce. So then when the uprising happens, they're not fighting each other, right? Like, they are having unity barbecues, and the LAPD is coming in and smashing them. And the LAPD is arresting the leaders of this movement. And not only are they organizing for peace among themselves, but they're also demanding radical redistribution of the city's resources.
Dude, when I read that, I had no idea of that layer of it. And weren't they asking for a 3.2 billion like a year thing, which is what the LAPD gets now?
Yeah,
so they were that was already something they were thinking about it in an abolitionist way, being like, oh, we're gonna like take that money and do all these amazing things in our community. And like, I mean, what LA would look so fucking different if they would have been able to get that done. It's just wild that 3.2 billion, and then we're 30 years later, it's the same number that the LAPD actually has. It's wild.
Yeah, this I don't know what to. I don't think it has like a name, but it's referred to as like the Crips and Bloods plan to like rebuild LA or something like that. Is an amazing document that everyone should go read. Shout out to Mike Davis, who wrote two of the best things he's ever written after the 1992 rebellion, and talks all about this organizing. Like he knew about it, he was involved in it, like he was trying to tell people this shit is really important, right? Yeah. People don't want to listen. This history is amazing. I mean, and I think it's ahead of even what people are doing today. Like people for the most part aren't actually demanding this sort of level of redistribution of city resources like they're demanding. Really go read the document. I mean, it's only 10 pages. There's a lot of amazing ideas there. Like they want to take the burnt out stores and turn them into community centers and turn them into like health centers and childcare centers and increase funding to education. And they want to, do all this amazing stuff. Anyway, so that radical history I think has to factor into like why they choose to roll out CSP at Jordan Downs, right? It's not a coincidence.
And you talk about, since we're talking about LAPD, in this part of the article, you wrote, by 1997, the most notable public investment in South Central was the new $30 million LAPD station on 77th Street. Yeah. It's beautiful, a resident of Nickerson Gardens mournfully told a Los Angeles Times reporter that year. You see anything else in the community that looks better than that jail. You also talk about the LAPD current headquarters in downtown LA, which cost us $437 million.
Jesus Christ, man.
And the city spent, as you write, the city spent almost as much money on that single building as it would cost to adequately repair its entire stock of public housing.
Yeah, it's just the same shit you see over and over again. Like, the city's going to spend a ton of money on cops, on building pig headquarters, and they're going to neglect public housing. The way that history just repeats itself is really wild to me. So yeah, the $437 million LAPD headquarters built, I think in 2008. Like, that's so much money. That's so much money. Why? They had the Parker Center, that big ass building that they demolished. Like that was fine, I'm sure. Why do they need a new, spend that money on public housing?
Yeah. And what's also interesting is that building, the Parker Center, I think the framing of it was that it was decrepit and it was falling apart. And it's kind of like the same type of messaging that they put into these public housing projects is that, oh yeah, they're falling apart, when in reality, when they're actually surveyed by independent people. And I think even there was one case where HACLA actually had one of their contractors say, oh yeah, there's nothing structurally wrong with this place. Like, it would cost you less money, or it would cost you more money to completely decimate this place instead of just actually improving it.
Yeah, that's a funny thing that you see over and over again. Like, there will be, I don't know, some sort of federal report or even the housing authority itself in some document being like, oh yeah, the property's in fair condition. It's not, everything's fine. And then 2 years later, they're like, it's obsolete. It needs to be torn down. It is structurally deficient and we have to tear it down. And it's like, you people are just lying. Like, they just lie in these things. They get some firm to say whatever it is they want them to say. The brazenness of the way they do it sometimes is really wild. Yeah.
Part 8, to really strike gold. So you talk about the Los Angeles Times heralding a real estate gold rush in Watts. And to have, as Hamid Khan describes the state, talk about this. It's like very similar to how the U.S. empire views countries around the world, right? You wrote, before a single unit had been built, the redevelopment of Jordan Downs was already having its intended effect. We definitely see that through things like SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, right? Can you kind of expand on why there are already effects in these areas when redevelopment hasn't even started?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what we need to understand is that just announcing redevelopment is a signal to investors and like other, forms of real estate capital that the city and the state is about to pour in a ton of money to this area and undergo a big effort to change it, to gentrify it. And hey, this is your time to like start buying property here because you'll be able to flip it. And you absolutely see that happening. Like you said, the LA Times is talking about a gold rush in Watts because the house flippers are coming in, they're buying these places, they're doing these little repairs and they're selling them. The funny thing that you see too is Hackla talking about the gold rush, so you get this quote from a high-level Hackla executive being like, to really strike gold, you need that one catalytic project, and that's Jordan Downs. So they're like openly boasting about how this project is going to lead to striking gold for their community. And of course, she follows it up by saying that she's referring to like amenities. Like everyone loves amenities. You can't go wrong if you're talking about amenities that people need. But we know what they mean. And I think it's clear what they mean. And something that's funny too in this history is like the first phase of Jordan Downs, the redevelopment includes this place that they call Freedom Plaza, which is just such an absurd name for a place that has like a Nike store and a Ross and a Starbucks.
Well, I thought you put something interesting in that, like, the people can enjoy those or go work for them for minimum wage because
Hackla publishes the numbers and the average job there pays $15 an hour.
Jesus Christ.
And they boast about how many tenants they've been able to get jobs, and it's like, okay, 15 hours, minimum wage jobs, like literally.
Yeah.
Maybe stop bragging about that. So, but yeah, so that's exactly what we see happening in Watts around Jordan Downs.
During this war on public housing here in LA, there's been a couple Hackla executive directors that have fallen, that have resigned, as we say, fired by the people. Can you talk about Rudy Montiel and maybe some of these other? I think there was I can't remember her name.
Correa, right? Is that what
Gonzalez Correa?
Yeah, Correa.
Yeah. Yeah. So she was the one. So she was the one in 1989 who tried to privatize Jordan Downs, and when the tenants fought back, it led to her being fired.
Well, didn't Bradley finally come out against her?
Yeah, exactly.
So he even knew, like, I can't be associated with this anymore.
Exactly. The tenant organizing like completely shifted the political landscape, and when the mayor is throwing you under the bus, like it's time to go. So that was in 1989. In 2010, Hackla suddenly basically starts, they have to submit these documents to the federal government every year. And basically they suddenly start saying every single development is open for privatization. Like every single development is a candidate. They used to list only a couple, and then all of a sudden they're like every single one. Tenants protest this like hell, right? And they end up even doing a protest at this guy's home, Rudy Montiel. He responds, or the housing authority responds, by trying to evict like 9 of them who were involved in this protest. And luckily there's an uproar about that. So city council's all pissed about it. The LA Times is writing about it. This guy ends up getting canned because he tried to evict tenants who like came to protest at his home in response to these privatization plans. Yeah. So it's pretty cool history, and they were able to slow the city down, I think, for sure with this organizing. But then Doug Guthrie gets brought in 2012. And like I said, he's really smooth. He really knows how to say the right things. It's not about gentrification. It's about improving people's lives. And it's about, providing services and providing amenities. And even though his history is profiting off of the displacement of like thousands of black people in Cabrini Green in Chicago as a private developer, he knows better at this point than to be so explicit about it, right? So Doug Guthrie is still the head of Hackla, and he's dangerous. He's slick. Yeah, he's good at what he does.
Can you talk a little bit about the media's sort of complicity in all this? Because, one thing I noticed in all the parts of the series is like the headlines that would come out in the Los Angeles Times and what was the other, Daily Breeze? Yeah. And just how everyone was supporting, and they were providing cover for all these bad things that were happening. So yeah, talk to us more about that. And like, obviously the media is pretty much the same as it was back then, maybe even worse now. But yeah, how has that evolved from them, giving these things kind of nice peachy headlines to now?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that in. You see a couple different types of headlines, and it's super consistent across the different developments and across the decades. One of them that you see is look at this piece of shit community that is just worthless and miserable, right?
Yeah.
And like, you'd have headlines about gangs and drugs. And again, it's not to deny that like these things were happening to a certain extent, but reducing an entire community to a gang infested, labyrinth of violence is certainly a choice. It's certainly one way to frame it, right?
Yeah.
You're not telling all sorts of other stories that exist there.
Well, you're also not sort of giving a reason as to why perhaps there are gangs there. Like what is the response to poverty? They don't ever give that context. Like, oh no, this place is full of gangs and bad people, but they never give you, oh well, this is also a community that's been ravaged by countless administrations and the police and all that.
Totally. So you see the stigmatization of these communities really aggressively by the media. And then on the other hand, when the redevelopment plans are announced, and especially after the redevelopment projects are finished, it's like these glowing reports. It's sort of like what you see with, I don't know, just taking the State Department's word for how the war is going or whatever, or why we need to bomb Iraq or whatever. Like they just take these quotes directly from the housing authority officials or the developers, and provide exactly the type of spin that they want. So you have these headlines like, housing project brings hope to the community. And meanwhile, like hundreds of people are protesting against this redevelopment plan, but they're not going to mention that, right? Or if they do mention it, it's like really a side story. And then you have these glowing quotes from the politicians about how it's like a renaissance from the neighborhood and it's revitalizing the entire area. And I mean, it's just wild. The media that we see basically just provides a perspective of property owners. It's remarkably consistent. These days, I'm trying to think. I mean, there's not really that much reporting on public housing these days, I would say, at all. Like right now, there is a process that's happening for William Mead Homes, which is right on the edge of Chinatown. I don't think there's been a single thing written about it, but they're like just getting into the point where they're probably going to, solicit bids for developers soon and start coming up with like concrete plans. I'm sure you'll see the same thing. Anyway, the William Mead stuff is funny. I mean, I didn't write about it very much, but maybe I'll write a follow-up piece. It's like there's a whole other thing. Like William Mead, it's like it's safe. All the stuff talks about how the housing authority documents talk about how it's safe, and for that reason, we need to like privatize it and like bring more apartments into that. So no matter what the situation is, like they're finding a reason to privatize and like redevelop, right? But yeah, the media is major here. The media is completely providing the perspective of the property owners and really silencing any sort of critique of the housing authority.
Yes, you talk about Jordan Downs in part 9 of the series, and then in the 10th part, you bring it all to a close. And talk about kind of the way we should move in the future. And I think there were 3 main points you touched upon, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, that last part is just trying to give us the confidence to, like, push this stuff forward. We don't need to be on the defensive when we're talking about public housing. Like, something you see is, yeah, okay, we can all agree public housing was a failure, but we should have more government-owned housing. We don't need to say that first part. Mm-hmm. Why are we saying that first part? Like, every single time that people's homes are threatened with privatization or redevelopment, they fight back. So the residents themselves aren't apologizing for supporting public housing. Why are we doing that? Because, there's this conventional wisdom out there that public housing is a failure, that it was miserable. And I just don't think the record supports that at all. So especially for folks who consider themselves on the left, fight for public housing. We don't need to be apologetic about that. Some of the more specific points there too were like, people just love to get wonky with this stuff and try to be like, well, okay, public housing, but the Faircloth Amendment, like there are limits under the federal government, or like, oh, well, Article 34, California Constitution limits how much, and it's like those things are true to a certain extent. Like there is, in general, a limit on a municipality needs to get a public authorization before they develop more low-income housing, but LA has that authorization already, like thousands and thousands of units left. So we don't actually need more authorization to build more public housing. Under the Faircloth Amendment, it limits the amount of units you can have using federal funding, and LA still has a couple thousand units to go before we hit that limit. And then again, like if we want to go beyond that limit, which we should, we don't need federal money. The city has a lot of resources. So I just think all these little, I mean, so for example, some of this stuff was something that Garcetti loved to point to. So Garcetti loved to be like, oh, my hands are tied. I would love to build more affordable housing. I'd love to redistribute more money to this, but I just can't. And it's like, those aren't excuses, you know. Yeah. The barriers are really not legal. They're political.
If anybody tries to talk to me about the Faircloth Amendment, you're getting your fucking ass beat.
Yeah,
that exactly. I'm saying that's a fucking promise.
Don't come around here with that shit.
For real, get that out of my face.
I guess speaking about public housing generally, is there a model in the United States that you think has worked in any city?
I wouldn't say I'm an expert on this, but I do think New York is pointed to as a model. They have, I wish I had the number, a lot more units than LA has. So LA at its peak had about 8,000 something units.
8,000.
8,000, wow. Which is not that much in a city of 4 million. New York, I think, has 400,000 residents or 300,000 residents living in public housing. Wow. So massive public housing system. And again, so I see now I'm doing it. Like I'm saying, like it's not perfect, but it's not, we can acknowledge that it's been underfunded. I mean, it's been purposely underfunded and like assassinated at the federal and local levels. But those are still 300,000 people who are able to live in one of the wealthiest cities in the world, right? Like good luck finding housing in the private market if you're, have super low income in New York right now. But because of public housing, those people are able to live there. I mean, that's a huge win, So I think that just immediately provides a model, and I think a lot of places that are not in the U.S. I think probably do a much better job.
Well, expand on that. What countries or places?
I mean, again, I'm not. People always point to Vienna.
Okay.
Which like
Austria.
Yeah, is fine. I'm sure it's good. I think we can also point to a place like Cuba. Like, I don't think Cuba has a mass public housing program. I don't think they necessarily have the resources for that, but they certainly don't have private land ownership in the same way that we do in private land speculation. And this is not to say there are no homeless people in Cuba, but I don't think Cuba is struggling with a homelessness crisis like you see all across the United States, right? So,
but I heard communism was bad. Is that true? Obviously, it's not.
I'm like, what do I say to this?
People know what show they're listening to.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
I had a couple more questions.
Yeah, no, please. Yeah,
Personal questions.
Yeah.
Okay. There is this picture of you that I most often see associated with your name. You're on a bed. It's like pink, looking very sexy.
Oh, yeah, okay. I know this picture, sure.
Can you give us some background to that photo? I just want to know. I don't know.
Like my Twitter profile picture,
yeah,
I think?
It's like you're just chilling on a bed.
Yeah, well, my cat, my partner's cat, I mean, we've been dating for several years. Our cat is sitting on my lap, and I think it's very cute.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was in my partner's studio apartment that they had a couple years back.
Okay.
Just chilling.
Okay.
Got my Mac Miller t-shirt on.
Okay.
Lily, my cat, is chilling on my lap. Yeah.
I mean, that would be a perfect dating profile picture, but you are taken, so
yeah.
There you go.
That's all he talks about these days is dating.
That's true, yeah.
Dating.
You're right.
What are some things that you're organizing around here in LA, I guess, that people should know about and you'd like them to tap into?
I'm a member of the Los Angeles Tenants Union. I organize with the West Side Local, so we're trying our best to provide some sort of militant, radical organizing on the West Side, which is difficult, but we're doing it. We're doing a decent job. I'm also a part of the organizing around the Hillside Villa tenants in Chinatown. This is a group of tenants who live at a building that used to be quote unquote affordable, and then it expired. The affordability agreement expired, so their rents jumped by 200%. I mean, it's a whole thing. We think those rent increases were illegal, and we're currently fighting evictions in court right now, actually. But they are calling on the city to use eminent domain to buy their building and keep it affordable. Keep it as public housing maybe, or, maybe transfer it to some sort of entity that will do a good job of keeping it affordable. And the city's been really dragging their feet. It's been a 5-year battle at this point. Eminent domain has been used across Los Angeles to displace poor people. So some of the families at Hillside Villa were displaced by eminent domain to build a convention center.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Comes full circle. Yeah. So our argument is, hey, why don't you use eminent domain to help poor people stay in their homes rather than displace them? If it's something that the city wants to do for rich people, they're going to do it. Like, they're going to build a Staples Center. They're going to displace people from Bunker Hill. When it comes to helping tenants stay housed during a historic housing crisis, like, suddenly it's too expensive, right? So it's just nonsense. It's class war. It's the same stuff you see, but we are fighting for eminent domain, for the city to come in and expropriate the property from the property owner.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say the first time I met you was actually at City Hall.
Right. Oh my God.
On the fourth floor. On the fourth floor, or we were in the rotunda on the third floor, and then you said, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" It was me and Richie. We just gotten out of city council, or got kicked out of city council meeting, and you said, "Hey, why don't you come up to the fourth floor and help provide a distraction?"
Yes. That worked wonderfully. The three of us distracted the security guard, and then a group of like 15 tenants just like walked right past.
Oh, hell yeah.
That was back when Cedillo was still in office, that motherfucker.
So what have been your dealings with Eunisis's office? Has she been supportive, or what's going on there?
It's been complicated. She has not publicly supported eminent domain since she's been in office.
Yeah.
Which is very disappointing. And we've had meetings, and we've asked her to, and it's always like, oh yeah, it's coming. We will. Of course we will. We want to do it.
She say fam after she loves to say fam.
I don't remember if the
Okay.
yeah.
She does.
Yeah, she does.
likely said
it.
Yeah. It's a mixed bag for sure, and in some ways it's harder to organize when you have someone in office who's constantly telling you how much they support you.
Yeah.
Compared to when you have someone who's like Gil Cedillo, who's just an outright piece of shit, right? You know he's the enemy. At least he supported eminent domain publicly.
Interesting. Damn.
And yeah, I mean, you do see her at some of the rallies and protests that Hillside Villa has been a part of. So yeah, it'll be interesting. When is that time? Eunice, I know you watching. When's that time? When it gonna come out? And so my final questions. What books are you reading right now? Something that we started a couple episodes back, and I'm really intrigued by like what people are reading.
Oh man, okay, this is such a deep cut. I'm reading this book called Shen Fan. It's about so the first book this guy, or not the first book he wrote maybe, but like the first one I read of this guy, is called Fan Shen, and it's this American who goes to a Chinese village during the revolution in 1940, or like it was actually the years leading up to the revolution in like the late 40s. And just writes this like 600-page book about everything he sees, and it's amazing. It's amazing seeing this like this village that has suffered for so long under this feudal tyranny and this miserable life of like landlords, just dominating people and really brutal stuff, sort of take the revolution into their own hands and redistribute land and join the Communist Party and have these meetings about what this means, and are we overdoing it? Are we doing enough? How do we decide whose land to take? We don't want to go overboard. Anyways, it's an amazing book. And then he wrote a follow-up to it in 1983 that sort of covers, I'm like halfway through. It covers like the time since then. That stuff's really is really humbling. It's easy to think that like, I don't know, educated people in the West are like the arbiters of socialism and like communism and theory and stuff like that. And then you read about, peasants who like can barely read, like enacting or doing their best, struggling to enact socialism under, really miserable conditions and trying to take a very poor country and make life better. And it's just that's what communism is, right? Like that's what socialism is. Not, unfortunately, not so much like what we're doing yet. Not yet.
How did you, just out of curiosity, how did you discover the book? You said it's a deep cut.
It is a deep cut, yeah. I don't know how to, if you like Google enough of like best books about the Chinese Revolution, the first one will come up.
Okay.
And I just loved that book. It blew my mind, that book. The guy's a beautiful writer. He writes like it's a novel, he's got an amazing he's got amazing prose and a way of just telling stories basically. Mm-hmm. And then it took me about a year, but then I was like, I need to read the follow-up. I need to read the next one.
What are you reading, Jason?
I just finished reading Making Revolution by Field Marshal Don Cox, which gives an intimate look into the Black Panther Party. He was very much a part of the whole process. He was part of the San Francisco chapter, eventually became part of the Central Committee, and then made his way over to Algiers and helped set up the international section of the Black Panther Party. But it's an intimate look into it where he really breaks down, he was charged with freeing Huey when Huey got, when he was put into jail for murdering John Frey and another cop. He didn't murder the other cop, unfortunately. But anyways, so he was in the Alameda courthouse, or I think that's where he was locked up, was in the Alameda courthouse. He was tasked with freeing Huey. And so he was really the person they went to when it came to weapons, when it came to strategy. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's like, for the people that love Cheesemay, he fucking pours it all out.
Can I borrow that? That sounds interesting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Kimberly Cox, who's his daughter, you can always catch her. She's usually at every second Sunday of the month at Simply Wholesome.
Cool.
Should I say veteran members of the Black Panther Party meet up and have a breakfast. And so she's normally there, too, if you ever want to chop it up with her.
I can go to this breakfast?
You could go to the breakfast.
Oh, really?
We can go together.
I'd love to.
Yeah. It's dope. You have people like Harold Welton, who organized around Black August, and also is a filmmaker. He actually did a film on Avalon. I think it was Avalon Gardens.
Oh shit.
Yeah. So they had done some organizing there as part of the Jonathan Jackson education cadre in the 70s.
Oh wow, I want to watch that. Okay.
Yeah. What about you, Albert? What do you
listen, I know you said you don't read nonfiction, right? Or you don't read fiction, I should say. Yeah. I don't know. I'm reading the Exorcist book.
Okay.
Like the book that the movie was based on, which is like one of my favorite books. I'm rereading it, I should say. I'm also reading the Mike Davis, what was it, with the policing in the 60s or whatever? Or what's the...
Set the Night on Fire?
Yeah, I'm reading that, which is pretty good. I have Parable of the Sower, is that by Octavia Butler?
Yeah.
That's kind of next on my pile once I get done with those. But not gonna lie, my attention span's pretty fucking bad, so I'm trying to force myself to read more. I had to sit here in this office today and read your thing, because otherwise at home I'm like, oh, let me read a little bit and then I'll just do something else. But I'm trying to I used to read 2 books a month in high school. Yeah. And now, but also I was reading Lord of the Rings and shit like that. So I like a little bit of fantasy and fake bullshit in my life, but I don't know.
Well, Jacob, we really appreciate
this was great, man. You're awesome.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
It's truly an honor, and again, really appreciate you putting together this work, and I'm sure it's going to reverberate for years to come, decades to come. People are going to refer to this.
Thank you. Y'all are doing great stuff. We need your perspective on LA politics. You don't really get it anywhere else, unfortunately.
Well, thank you. You've said nice things about the podcast, so thank you for that. And thanks for being on, man. This is going to be our first 2-part episode for sure.
Yes.
I don't think we're going to release a 2-hour episode.
No.
But where can people find you and your work and all that? Where are you on the socials?
I'm on Twitter. If he starts making people pay for Twitter, I'm
bouncing. Yeah.
I don't think. Although, what if I do though? What? All it would take is a couple people who I respect being fuck it, I'll pay $1 a month.
Yeah.
And then I'm probably gonna. Anyways, hopefully not. But I guess I'm on Twitter technically. Yeah.
Okay.
Great analysis on Twitter.
What's your at? Well, you're private though, so I guess maybe.
Jacob, no, I'm not private.
You're not private anymore. Okay.
I don't tweet that much anymore. Anyways, at Jacob Wooch, just Google me. It comes up.
Yeah. Good looking man.
We usually end our episodes by saying fuck. Always fuck the police. Fuck the LAPD. Well, she'll be saying fuck
Hackla, obviously.
Fuck the U.S. war machine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Right. Awesome. Well, appreciate y'all tuning in. And as always, subscribe our content, retweet when we put out tweets, please.
Watch our videos. Yes. Connect with us. Leave us a rating on whatever podcast app you use. Let us know how we're doing if you like it. And, suggest Suggest episode ideas. Go ahead.
We got an email for the first time.
I haven't checked the email.
So check the email. Okay. We'll be responding to your question to that special listener during our next October pig roast.
Oh, sweet. Okay. Yes. Well, see you soon, guys. Fuck the police. Bye.